It's in me. It's in me. Do you know the truth? And because of the way it's taught, they think I'm mentally disabled, which is really frustrating sometimes.
Walk a day in Jordan Milroy's shoes.
It's in me.
That's a blatant discriminatory act there.
The 25-year-old has cerebral palsy, but from the way people stare and blatantly ignore him, he says he's made to feel like an alien.
People who are really negative and completely just blocked me out like I wasn't even there.
Tonight, Jordan and his friend Conan Visser from special needs charity I Can I Will want to demonstrate how hurtful people can be to those with disabilities, either deliberately
Excuse me.
or unconsciously.
They completely ignore me. And make me feel like I'm worth nothing.
People are intimidated and shy. They shy away from the situation because they don't know what to do.
This inspirational and intelligent larrikin
I can, I will.
has a following of over 20,000 people worldwide. Jordan Milroy is a star on social media because he's defying odds. He travels around the globe, climbing towers,
But the nerves are gone. And for some, it's awesome.
to motivate others and raise awareness about cerebral palsy.
I am Jordan, and I just climbed the Brisbane 111 tower in 45 minutes.
He's also just finished a bachelor degree in public relations.
I think as a disabled person, it's my responsibility to educate people. Before I started, I was in a wheelchair, depressed, and didn't want to do anything.
It's uncomfortable social situations like the ones you're about to see that makes Jordan and Conan desperate to change society's perceptions.
I was actually a little bit shocked initially, but it is kind of very usual for Jordan to experience it on a daily basis.
Here, Jordan is about to ask a middle-aged couple where the closest bathroom is.
It's in me.
They look, then incredibly, they ignore Jordan. But it's a different story when Conan approaches them.
Excuse us guys, do you know where the closest toilet is?
Probably Hungry Jack's.
Yeah, they're fine. They're actually more than helpful.
What about this businessman?
It's in me.
He throws his hand out as soon as Jordan opens his mouth, indicating he won't help.
You look at Jordan and people are treating him like he has an intellectual disability.
But when Conan asks,
Excuse me, do you know where the closest toilet is?
Just up here, just near that horse there?
Yep.
Just there.
Okay, cool. Thank you. He was actually friendly.
And it brings out the true colours in people. If that name bobs me up, what type of person is he really?
this shocking scenario blew our minds. Jordan approaches a man on a bench to ask for directions to a local store.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me.
3 times, and the man doesn't even look up at Jordan. But the same man immediately points Conan in the right direction. Jordan faces this a countless number of times throughout our social experiment.
Hey, it's finished.
For anyone to go through that, that's quite hurtful and damaging.
It's finished. Do you know it?
When Jordan drops his keys, even though a young woman witnesses it, she keeps walking. Thankfully, seconds later, a man runs over and helps.
Oh, thank you. It's finished. Do you know what the bathroom is?
The kindness of this couple, though, brings tears to our eyes.
We'll take you.
This heartwarming gesture is what Jordan has been hoping for all day.
Why Jordan feels the best when people do that is because it's so rare, when it shouldn't be so rare.
People with disabilities, special needs, we're all the same. We all want to be included.
Don't you bring me down today.
So today I hope to give you a little information about what is the ADA, what's discrimination in the workplace, what's not, and what you can do about it. A little legal disclaimer, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not here to give you legal advice. The information today is sort of general state of what the law is, but as we're going to learn, it's really fact-specific, and it also depends on the jurisdiction where you're in. So if you are facing a legal problem, you should absolutely consult an attorney. I work for the Public Interest Law Center, which is a nonprofit civil rights firm here in Philadelphia, and I focus on employment discrimination and disability rights. This is sort of a brief rundown. We're not going to get to everything today. Some of the slides are here just for your reference. You have a copy of them, and we'll certainly take questions at the end. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty. The focus of this talk today is discrimination. So what is discrimination? The ADA and its corollary, we have a state law in Pennsylvania called the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, and if you're in Philadelphia, there's the Fair Practices Ordinance. I'm going to refer to all of them as the ADA, but they give kind of three basic prohibitions on discrimination. And under these laws, discrimination is, one, making an employment decision because of a person's disability, with one caveat that we'll discuss in a moment. Two, failing to provide reasonable accommodations to otherwise qualified employees in the workplace. And three, allowing a hostile work environment, which is basically legal harassment. We'll hopefully get to that at the end. What is not discrimination? So Pennsylvania, we're an at-will state, meaning an employer can fire you for no reason at all. They can be mean to you, they can be unfair, they can give you crummy shifts, unless the reason for this abusive treatment is your disability. So how do you know that the reason is your disability? We use kind of two main ways to show that. Sometimes the employer will tell you, they'll say, oh, you're really qualified for this job, but I'm worried you're going to have a seizure on my sales floor, and I just can't have that. So they're telling you the reason they're not hiring you is your disability. Other times you will need to look to what we call a comparator, and that's a similarly situated employee. That's someone who ideally you're going to have the same job title, the same supervisor, you want to have the same kind of background and qualifications, and that person was treated more favorably than you. And the reason that we look to a comparator is we're kind of trying to isolate the factors. So everything else being equal, what's the difference? Your disability. So the inference is that the reason for the adverse action is your disability. So we take an example. Sarah and Tom, and I just want to say Tom has autism. I don't like saying people are autistic or are, but I just wanted to clarify that. So in this instance, Tom's actually a superior employee. He's been there for 20 years. He has a good work record. Sarah's new. She has a mixed record. She's okay, but she's not great. But Sarah gets paid more than Tom. Well, why is that? Has she been there longer? No. Is she a better worker? No. Does she have more experience? No. So what's the difference between the two of them? Trying to isolate that the disability is the only reason that Tom's being paid less. Now, in real life, it's really complicated, and there are a lot of factors, but this is sort of an example to show you. Another thing that comes up sometimes is people are being disciplined unfairly, and sometimes it's because the supervisor just likes one person more than the other. Sometimes it's, I'm coming to work late and I get disciplined, but Sarah comes to work late and she doesn't get disciplined. well, I've been to work late 5 or 6 times now. This was Sarah's first time. So that's a legitimate reason to treat me differently than Sarah. But sometimes it's, again, the isolation factor is because of disability. And so all things being equal, and ideally if you have the same supervisor, the same decision maker, that's another way to show that the reason is your disability. So another important caveat we mentioned a moment ago is discrimination is making a decision based on a person's disability unless the person is not otherwise qualified for the job. So Congress said you're allowed to say, well, a person, for example, a bus driver who's blind. The Congress said, well, you're allowed to say that person is excluded from the job, even though the reason is their disability. It's because of their blindness that you're not hiring them. They have a great driving record, but they can't see anymore because they're not able to drive the bus. They're not qualified to do that. And qualified for the job means 2 main things. One, that you meet the requisite skills, background, certification. I'm applying to be a doctor. I should probably have a medical degree. Otherwise, I'm not qualified for the job. That was pretty easy. The more complicated one is you're able to perform the essential functions of the job with or without a reasonable accommodation. We'll get to that second part in a minute. But essential functions of the job is a term of art. It's sort of the crucial fundamental duties that are performed in the job. It's the reason the job was created. It's the things that you do most often in the job. It can also be things that are really important that you might not do frequently. So say I'm a law enforcement officer and I almost never discharge my firearm, but it's really important that I'm able to do that when it's actually necessary. That's an important function of the job. It does not include ancillary non-requirement functions. So say I'm a secretary, and this is actually a real example. Say I'm a secretary and I don't drive. And the secretary job, I'm filing, I'm making copies, I'm doing letters, I'm answering the phones. I'm great at all of those things. The employer tells me so. But he's concerned that I don't drive. And the reason is because they have a tradition in the office that the secretary goes and gets a birthday cake for everyone on their birthday, which is a lovely tradition, very nice. Except it's not really part of the core functions of the secretary job. So I would feel pretty good arguing that picking up birthday cakes is not an essential function of the secretary job. So refusing to give me that job because they can't go do that ancillary, non-essential job function would be illegal discrimination. An important note on this is an employer can't just assume that based on a particular diagnosis you're not qualified for the job. Now, you guys don't have to disclose your disability at any point during the job interview unless there's employer, well, there are 3 exceptions to this. One, the employer is concerned that over the course of your job performance, you're not qualified for the job. Something happens, they're wondering what's going on, then they might be able to ask you some questions about it. The second is if you are requesting an accommodation, and the third is if there's a direct threat question. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the reason for the particularized inquiry is an employer is not allowed to say all people with epilepsy can't do this job. Because some people can and some people can't, and it depends on the job, but it also depends on how your particular condition manifests, and especially with epilepsy, there's a wide range of how you experience and how, depending on your responsiveness to treatment. So generally, employers cannot say all people with this condition cannot do this particular kind of job. There's unfortunate exception in the Third Circuit court upheld. That's where we are here in Pennsylvania. That's the federal court. That's Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. And the court upheld a policy by the State Trooper Association saying that police officers had to be seizure-free for 5 years. And the court said, well, that's sufficiently connected to the requirements of the job that that's okay. And it's particularized in the sense that the individual, so it's not all people with epilepsy, but it's the individual and how their particular condition is manifest and how that relates to performing the job. But it also has to be based on science. It can't be based on, and this comes up a lot for, say, folks with HIV. An employer, you're in food service and they're worried, oh, you're using knives, I think you'll get HIV that way. Well, science says no, that's not true. And so they have to actually look at real medical literature, not just what one doctor who might be an outlier says. I'm going to come back to this one in a minute. Direct threat defense is very similar to qualified for the job. So it's like our bus driver. well, maybe he can actually drive a bus, right? He drove a bus for 20 years, no problem. He just can't see. So it'd be really dangerous if he drove a bus because you can imagine all the things that might happen. Although interestingly, and this goes to the point about individualized inquiry, there's a South Dakota case where a forklift operator who was blind in one eye, the employer's doctors checked him out. They said, this guy can't drive a forklift, he's blind in one eye. Well, it turns out he could drive a forklift, and he actually proved that to the court. The employer never bothered to actually see him on the floor, and he could drive it around the cones, and it wasn't actually a problem. So employers are really supposed to, again, individualize inquiry based on actual medical evidence and the facts. It's not just what your diagnosis is, it's your diagnosis related to your job performance. And that's why it's so particularized. The other really important piece about being qualified for the job is it's not just you walking into the door, it's you with or without a reasonable accommodation. And this part can be a little confusing for employers to wrap their heads around because it's an affirmative obligation that Congress imposed upon them. It's something extra and new that they have to do. And the purpose of the reasonable accommodation is to enable you to perform the essential functions of the job, to have equal opportunities in the workplace. Reasonable accommodation is defined as any change in the work environment or the manner in which work is conducted that enables people with disabilities to enjoy equal employment opportunities and participation in the workforce. And that's language from the regulations. I think that's really powerful. The idea is that we're trying to level the playing field. The upper limit of that, however, it's not limitless. It's not anything that you could possibly need to do the job. It's what we call an undue burden. And just like reasonable, whether or not you're qualified to do the job is particular to you and to the job, whether something is an undue burden is particular to the employer. And it's going to depend on their size, the nature of the business, on how flexible they can be. So a small employer might not be required to spend as much money as a large employer on accommodations. And also might depend on the workforce. So if you're a secretary in an office that does a lot of administration, it's easier to redistribute job tasks, whereas if I'm a secretary in a manufacturing facility and I'm the only admin person in the office, whether or not we can redistribute job tasks will be a little different. And I skipped a few slides. I'm going to go back. So these are kind of common examples that you might be familiar with. You know, we have ramps, we have physically accessible buildings, modifying equipment, screen readers for computers, etc. Slightly more challenging questions are adjusted schedules. And this will depend on the nature of the job. So for my job, I'm a lawyer. As long as I don't have a meeting, I could go in at 7:30, I could go in at 9:30. Doesn't really have an impact on how I do my job. I'm working the same number of hours. But if I'm a school teacher and I'm not there at 8:15 when the kids are there, that could be a problem. So it really depends on the job. Reassignment of non-essential job functions, like we talked about with in an admin situation, if you have a lot of other people, depending on the size of the employer, you might be able to redistribute those. It's really very fact specific. Non-essential job functions, of course, like the birthday cake. Someone else in the office can go pick up the birthday cake. That's okay. Regular attendance at the job is usually required. Telecommuting sometimes can be a reasonable accommodation, and this doesn't only depend on the job, it can also depend on the nature of the employer. So an obvious example, you know, if I'm an accountant, maybe I can access all of my materials remotely, I'm not meeting with clients, okay, I can, you know, work from home a couple days a week. I'm a construction worker or a restaurant chef. Well, my restaurant's not at my house and the customers aren't at my house, or, you know, I can't hammer shingles onto the home that we're constructing at my house. I have to go to the house that we're building. So those are, by the nature of the jobs, is not, even though it's the same accommodation, in one job it might be reasonable, whereas another job it might not be. And even if it's reasonable in one type of job, it might depend on the nature of the employer. A court has held that an IT position, which seems like something you could do remotely, in this one particular employer that was subject to the case, the court found that human interaction with the clients was a really important part of the job, and that was an integral part of the job. I don't really like that holding, but that's what a court said. And so you can see it depends very much on the facts and also where you happen to be. Different jurisdictions will have slightly different interpretations of, you know, these kind of vague terms. Another thing to keep in mind is that in addition to, you know, schedules and leave, you can have an adjusted schedule. So that might mean if you're assigned to work the night shift, you need to work the day shift. There is a court, actually here in Pennsylvania, there's a really important case, Colwell v. Rite Aid, where the court held that, I think that's actually my next, where the court held that an employee who needed help commuting to work because she couldn't see at night required a day shift. And the employer said, well, that doesn't have anything to do with work. Why do we have to care about that? That's her problem getting to and from work. And the court said, well, what's the problem? It's not an undue burden. You have a day shift available. Just swap her with someone who's currently working the day shift. Now, if you have a unionized job or where there's a seniority system that's consistently enforced, the Supreme Court said that that does not necessarily trump the ADA. But unions are also required to provide reasonable accommodations under the ADA. So you might have to get everybody at the table to work that out. But I just want to flag for you if there's a union, there's an additional step you might have to go through. One last point. So undue burden doesn't mean no burden, right? Congress gave this affirmative obligation onto employers. So while they might not be required to completely tear down and restructure their building, they might have to spend some money to provide accommodations. Now, in real life, employers like accommodations that don't cost money, but that doesn't mean that ultimately they won't be required to do that. Things that are generally found to not be reasonable accommodations are eliminating essential job functions. So I'm the secretary, I don't drive, fine. Birthday cake, ancillary function, but using the computer, that's going to be an essential function of my job. I really can't do that job without using the computer. Lowering productivity standards. I'm in a factory, I have a quota I have to meet. Doesn't matter that I have a manual dexterity limitation. I'm an attorney, I have to bill the same number of hours. It doesn't matter if I have dyslexia. Courts also say you don't have to make up a new job to accommodate somebody. You don't have to create a new light duty position if that doesn't exist, and you don't have to make a full-time position into a part-time position. Sometimes, though, you do have to adjust schedules. So one option is if it's not essential that you're at work at a specific time, so the store opens at 9, you need to have the salespeople on the floor at 9. Other jobs, maybe you're a writer, and it's okay if you're there 8:30 or 9:30. You might also be able to swap shifts, like the woman in the Rite Aid case, where they already had a daytime shift available. That was a regularly scheduled shift, and it wasn't an undue burden for her to move into that shift position. There are also instances where employees need help when an employer changes their job work site. Usually commuting to work, the employer doesn't have to provide accommodations unless they're helping other people get to work. There are two conflicting cases on this. One where the court held, this is the First Circuit, held that an employee who actually had epilepsy and rode his bicycle to work, and the employer moved his job site further away and he couldn't get there at 8 a.m. And the court said, well, that's, the employer doesn't have anything to do with when you get to work. Well, the Second Circuit held that's not really fair because you're telling the employee first started at this one job site where he could access the workplace, and then you moved it to another job site. So the Second Circuit came out another way. Again, it's important to know where you are. The Rite Aid case, that's here in this circuit, so that's a really good case for us. So now we talked a little bit about what accommodations are, and I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you, so we're going to have questions, I promise. So it's the most important thing about all of this is we talked before, you don't have to disclose your disability, but if you want an accommodation, you must disclose a disability. And it's really important if you're struggling at work, or if you're showing up late and you don't tell your employer why, they're allowed to discipline you just like they are every other person. Or even if they know you have epilepsy and you haven't said, I need an accommodation to do X at work, they're again allowed to treat you the same as every other employee regardless of your disability. So if you need help performing essential job functions, it's really important you have to affirmatively ask for them. And it's also, to the employer's benefit. They want you to be working to your maximum productivity. They want you to be doing a good job. That's why they hired you, to do work for them. I like to make accommodations requests in writing. Sometimes you have a good relationship with a supervisor, you can kind of casually ask them, they'll give it to you, it works out, great. Sometimes that supervisor leaves, you get a new one, You ask for the same accommodation, they say, well, I don't see that in your employment record. Why do you need that? Then you're at square one again. Also, I've seen cases where an employee asks their supervisor for accommodation. The supervisor says, yeah, we'll get that for you. They never hear from them again. So creating a record is helpful because then, one, you can use it to go to other managers if you have to, or to an attorney if you have to as well. Now, how many people you send this letter to depends on how comfortable you are sharing your personal private medical information with your employer. When you make an accommodation request, they can ask you for medical documentation. They're only supposed to share that with people who actually need to see it, like the people implementing your accommodation. They're not allowed to go, Bob is complaining, hey, how come John's getting special treatment? None of your business, Bob. They're really not supposed to tell other employees about why you're getting reasonable accommodations. In the handouts, you guys have a sample accommodation letter. That's designed for folks with, it's not in the PowerPoint, it's in a separate sheet. The other side is kind of a little rundown of steps to go through. So if you're comfortable sharing with people, HR can be your friend. People often forget that, you're having a problem in the workplace. HR, they do benefits and stuff, but they're also there to help manage employee issues. You're having a problem with your supervisor or coworker harassment. You need an accommodation. HR is a really good resource if your company has one. That said, they're only as good as they're trained, but in some instances they can be really helpful. So what's supposed to happen next? You have this letter, you put it in writing. One point that's listed on kind of the steps in getting an accommodation is be careful how you word your letter. You don't want to write yourself out of a job. Sometimes folks want to go on and on explaining why they really need this accommodation, they're really disabled, and they end up saying all the reasons that they can't do the job. You can do the job with a reasonable accommodation. And so you want to say, here are all the things I can do. You might have suggestions already, ideas of what you want as an accommodation. If you need ideas for suggestions, the Jobs Accommodation Network is a great resource. They have a hotline, they have a website, you can call them up 24 hours a day, get suggestions. But the point of this process, what we call the interactive process, is you're supposed to kind of engage in a dialogue, exchange information with an employer. So you have some ideas, you're bringing your request to them, they might have some ideas. The point is to share, you know your needs, your abilities, the employer knows its workforce and its resources and what might be available. If more than one accommodation is available that would enable you to do your job, the employer gets to pick which one to implement. You might not like the accommodation, you might think, there's no way that's gonna work. It can be ideal to try it out, unless you think it's going to be dangerous or something, and let the employer figure out that it doesn't work. You are entitled to an effective accommodation. Courts have read that into the term reasonable accommodation. Effective means that it works, but you want to kind of engage in sort of a friendly, open, inquisitorial tone. Okay, let's try that out. Let's see if that works. And it'll be obvious. Ideally, it'll be obvious to the employer that it doesn't work, or then you'll have, again, documenting the reasons, the specific facts why it didn't work, and you can go back to the employer and start your request again. So you give this letter to your employer, ideally your supervisor, your manager, HR, whoever you think it makes sense to have keep a copy for yourself. Make sure it's dated. Make sure you write the names of the people who you give the letter to. When you have conversations about this, make sure you write down who was in the room, when did this conversation happen. If they respond to you verbally, you can send a follow-up email. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me today. We discussed X, Y, and Z. I look forward to continued productive conversations. You've just created a record of what you talked about. The employer is supposed to respond to you in a, quote, reasonable amount of time. What is that? No one said. If you don't hear back after a couple weeks, I think it's fair to follow up with them. You also have to be responsive to their requests for information. So if they ask you for medical documentation and more information from your doctor, you can't stonewall them. It's important for you to, both sides have to engage in this process in good faith. I'm going to skip over harassment unless you guys have questions about it, because I wanted to get to what happens if things don't work out. And this is where enforcement agencies come into play. We talked at the beginning about 3 different laws. Well, there are 3 different enforcement agencies depending on where you are. And they also cover depending on the size of the employer. The important thing to note is there is a time limit to file claims. So if you've been fired or denied an accommodation, you need to file your, or denied a job or a promotion, you need to file your claim within, under state law, within 180 days, which is 6 months, in order to keep your claim. And you have to file that either the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission or the EEOC. And you can go to either one and do what's called dual file, meaning you're filing under both state and federal law. Federal law is 300 days, which is about 9 months. In city law, if you're in Philadelphia, if you have a really small employer and they're not covered under the other statutes, so they have fewer than 5 employees, you also have 300 days to file your claim with the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations. The important point, and actually had a slight amendments to this, the important thing to know about filing a complaint is, 1, you have to do it before you can go to court. You have to do what's called exhaust your claims, meaning you go to administrative agency first. And the idea is they take your claim, they do an investigation, they give an opportunity for mediation. That's at the employer's choice, so sometimes you'll get to mediate and sit down and try to work it out. Sometimes it'll just go straight to the investigation. And if the whole process plays out, the enforcement agency might make a determination, might have a hearing. Most of these cases don't go all the way through the agency process. Either they'll go to court or they will be settled out through mediation. And also you can file a claim and then you can walk away from it. You can decide that that's not the right choice for you at any time that you choose. It's a long process. It usually takes a couple years, especially if you go to court. You file in the PHRC, 6 months to a year before you really kind of finish the process. If you choose to quit your job, you're going to also have to prove another claim called constructive discharge. Now, whether that's something you're gonna have to weigh. Don't make litigation your primary concern. You don't necessarily want to if you don't want to have a termination on your record, that's something that you have to consider, but just be aware that if you quit, and because you thought you were about to get fired because of your disability, you're also going to have to prove that additional claim. You need to look for work if you quit or fire a job. That's called mitigation. If you file for unemployment compensation, you're going to be doing this anyway. You should probably file for unemployment compensation if you think you're eligible. That's an important thing that a lot of people forget about. And then the last point is, even though it's long and hard and difficult, it's really important to take care of yourself during this process. Even asking for an accommodation can take a long time, and it can be easy to get frustrated, but you get angry at work, you blow up, you have a fight, well, they can fire you for that easy, their problem's gone. Don't give them a reason to get an easy out, but also, use your support network. I've seen a lot of people here today with family members and friends, and that's really important through all of these processes. So now I'd love to take your questions. Yes?
Can you go through the job interview process and not disclose that you have epilepsy, and then later, if your epilepsy becomes a problem in the workplace, can you then disclose it and say, I would like to have some accommodation?
Yes.
You said, okay, you don't have to during the interview.
No, and I didn't go into this in great detail, but there are a couple points here. One, the employer is not allowed to ask you on the job application or the interview process. They might have something like an optional disclosure form. That usually means they have an affirmative action policy and they're trying to hire people with disabilities. You can choose to answer that at your discretion. After you've been given an offer, then the employer can do whatever they want. They can ask any kind of medical question. They can make everyone take an HIV test. But why would they do that? They're not allowed to use that information to deny you the job unless, the 2 things we talked about, it shows that you're unable to perform the essential functions or there's a direct threat issue. Some employers have general screenings, but that's sort of something that you'll encounter on a case-by-case basis. I hear what you're saying, that HR representative is refusing your accommodation request. If you have gone through the interactive process, you've made the request, they've said no, especially if you have it in documentation, you can take that documentation to the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission and say, hey, I made this request, I think it's reasonable. You can also, it's fair to ask the employer why they don't think it's reasonable. You know, the undue burden, and if you're in court, they're going to have to prove that. Now, they don't have to tell you why, but I think that's a fair question to ask them. Well, what exactly are you worried about? And sometimes I had a case where there was a totally unrelated issue why this actually wasn't employer, it was a public accommodation, why they were saying no. So we fixed that issue, and we were able to work out the accommodation.
Okay, now I wrote to the Human Relations Commission. You said I can take up to 6 months before I hear something?
You have 6 months within which to file a complaint.
I filed and I didn't hear anything about a month. Is that normal to not hear anything within a month?
Yes, yeah, it takes a couple months for them to. Unfortunately, as you may know, our public systems are not well funded and resourced, and they just all have a backlog.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm very sorry to hear that. HR can be helpful, and unfortunately, reassignment to a different supervisors. Courts generally don't think that that's a reasonable accommodation. Also, if you want to file a complaint, you can, but harassment in the way that we think about it is a little different from the legal definition of a hostile work environment. So you have to prove 4 things. The conduct is unwelcome, it had the purpose or effect of interfering with your work, it's based on your status as a person with disability, and it's severe and pervasive. And that's sort of the difficult one to understand. So it means that both the nature of the harassment and the duration of it, it's kind of like a little graph. So it could be one time and it's really, really bad, like, you know, quid pro quo sexual harassment, you know, have sex with me or you're fired. One time, that's enough. It could be, I've seen a case where a gentleman was called, with intellectual disabilities, was called retarded every day, his entire job. And courts also found that constituted a hostile work environment. I think we're almost out of time, but I have cards in the back if you guys have individual questions for me. I'm happy to chat with you more afterwards.
Thank you.
There are large parking lots, perfectly healthy people with handicap parking placards taking up parking spots for the disabled. It's illegal, and our undercover cameras caught some of the abusers at one of the busiest campuses in New Mexico. Target 7's Conroy Chino has the exclusive story. Conroy?
Nelson, it didn't take us long to capture the problem on camera. We came to a location where parking is a premium, UNM, and watched the abuse unfold before our very eyes. Take a look. We chose an area lined with at least a dozen handicap parking spots in the middle of the University of New Mexico campus and watched. Before long, our hidden cameras caught this young female student in a Lexus pull up and park. She grabbed her backpack and headed off for class. Not long after that, this woman in a Volkswagen Jetta decided she was entitled to handicap parking. She had no visible handicap or disability. The same with this young man driving a Corvette. He didn't have any problems getting into his sports car. All 3 displayed handicap parking placards. The problem is the placards were not issued to them, nor were they driving anyone who was handicapped. We decided to question the abusers who took up a handicap parking place on more than one occasion.
Hi there. Hello. My name's Conroy Chino. I'm with Channel 7.
The woman in the Lexus, stunned when we showed up with our cameras, admitted she wasn't disabled.
You have no disability of any kind?
No.
You're perfectly healthy?
Definitely.
As for the placard?
It's my brother's. He's handicapped.
At a loss for words, she got into her car and quickly drove away. According to NBD, the placard in the Volkswagen Jetta belongs to an elderly man in a retirement home. His wife told us over the phone he doesn't attend UNM. As for the young man in that Corvette, well, he wasn't really happy to see us.
That was issued to a Roxanne Mades. Is that you?
It's a friend of mine.
You know, it's illegal to use someone else's placard and park in a handicapped parking spot.
I'd rather not be on TV if you... I think
how do you explain it?
Angry that we caught him on camera,
Put that on TV.
He went screeching out of the parking lot. But not before threatening our photographer with his car. We showed our undercover video to Jim Parker with the Governor's Committee on the Concerns for the Handicapped.
You know, I've been seeing stuff like this for so many years. I've gotten over a lot of the anger, and Not that it doesn't make me angry that people do it.
UNM students with visible handicaps find the abuse disturbing.
Every day, it's always a challenge to find a parking space.
It's up to UNM Parking Services to enforce the state's handicap parking laws.
Anytime that we see a violator that does not have a placard in a handicapped location, we issue a $100 citation.
But on the days we were at UNM, we didn't see anyone from Parking Services checking the handicap parking lot. These placards are issued by the State Motor Vehicle Division to individuals who have a problem walking. Only they can use the placard, no one else.
The handicap placard is issued to an individual who has the handicap. And it's only issued to the individual. It's not issued to anybody else, and it's not issued to a vehicle. It's issued to the individual.
Now, MVD says you need to provide medical proof in order to qualify for a handicap parking placard, and the person who's been issued that placard needs to be on board the vehicle. And if there's a violation, MVD says it can confiscate that placard. Live at UNM, Conroy Chino, KOAT Action 7 News.
All right, Conroy, thank you.
Because you say I'm not disabled. The cop right here is saying I'm not disabled because I don't look disabled. Yeah. But I'm a goddamn disabled veteran that served my country for almost 10 years.
I'm saying that
and
people in wheelchairs,
you're not the,
and you just get out the car and flow into
you're
the
not
stove.
The arbitrator of my handicap.
Well,
you
they shouldn't be giving
you don't get to decide, okay? Fucking United States government, when I got blown up in my fucking country 8 times with a damn IED and was in a coma for 2 fucking months, I get to decide who's disabled. You don't get to decide if I'm disabled or not. I want your goddamn name because you harassed me on a Sunday morning just because I don't look handicapped. You don't look well enough to be a fucking officer with your gut hanging over your stomach. I didn't say shit to you. I got out with my father, went in there to get my goddamn alcohol, and I was minding my business.
Sierra 91, Charlie Whiskey Sierra.
Run the goddamn plate, no goddamn warrants, run the goddamn handicap sticker. I'm a fucking disabled veteran. I park in a handicap spot if I want to park in a handicap spot. I don't need you. Whoa. Whoa. You don't have any right to do that, officer.
Move the camera out my face.
Hey, do not do it. With all the shit going on today, watch them. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. Watch out. Hey, call another officer over here right now. Call the police. Because what he just, hey, call the police. Call the goddamn police. You just knocked my camera out. This is a $700 phone. You can't knock my camera out of my thing.
321 Riviera, send me the unit over here.
Send another officer over here, man. Why you do that? Why would you do that?
Where's your driver's license?
You want my driver's license too? You want my insurance? You can't do that, man. Hey, somebody with a cooler head come over here. You can't do shit like that, officer. Come on now, if I did that to you, you'd take me to jail. You'd arrest me for assaulting a police officer. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Just because you're mad doesn't mean you can lose your temper like that.
I'm not mad.
So you cracked my phone. Look at that. That's an $800 phone you just cracked.
It ain't cracked.
It's right there. It's cracked. A big ass crack on my screen. You just cracked my cell phone, man.
Yeah.
Call another officer, because I don't feel safe with you over here. There's the paramedics. I'll let them know. Call somebody else, man. That's messed up. Hey, you guys, call a police officer right now. This dude over here says I'm not handicapped. Then fucking, I have my phone out. You slapped my phone out of my hand on the floor. Call somebody right now.
I'm not a police
You can still call for a police officer.
That's the police right there.
You can call for a police officer, bro. That's messed up.
That is the police.
What? What? He's a Did you run the thing?
I'm running it now.
Yeah. I need your name, Officer G. Wilson, because you broke my phone, man. Look at that. You cracked my damn phone. It's a crack.
Phone ain't cracked.
It's a crack under the screen.
There you go.
You broke my phone. Just so you know, there's 3 screws in this leg right here. Traumatic brain injury. All that shit from getting blown up and shot at. 2 times in Iraq and 1 time in Afghanistan. Just because I don't look like a disabled person doesn't mean I'm not disabled. You don't get to decide that. Uncle Sam says I'm 90% disabled for the rest of my life. That's how it works. 10 years of serving my damn country. You don't get to decide that. Did he call? Call somebody else, man, because that's messed up. You don't get to do that. You can't just knock my phone out of my hand like that, man. That's messed up. With all the crazy shit going on with police officers nowadays, you gotta be able to control your temper. As a citizen, I have a right to say whatever the hell I want, as long as I'm not accosting you.
Juliet 502-405-863730.
Hey, you have a cell phone on you? Can I use it real quick? You broke my phone too, man. You broke my damn phone. Yes. Why would I do that?
I don't know, but I need you to bring it down some.
No.
The reason why? Because all the things that's going on.
That's what we're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah, but he's on camera. There's cameras everywhere.
They were on camera too, baby. They were on camera too.
You want to shoot a disabled veteran for parking with no record? Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm not some damn criminal. I'm a college student now.
It's not about that.
Hello?
You can't, when people are handicapped.
I am handicapped. You just don't see it. Okay? I go to damn physical therapy almost every month. I walk short distances. That's why I park in the handicap spot. You don't see it.
You speaking of something?
No, 911 called emergency contact.
321 Riviera. Anything back on the GL and the pad?
Oh, no, that's the, oh, okay.
You don't get to do that. That's messed up. Something's gonna happen. No. I need a police officer out here at Walgreens on the corner of Broadway and Blue Heron ASAP. One of your officers out here. One of your officers, he said I'm not handicapped. I have a handicap placard. He says I'm not handicapped. He starts accosting me and my father, then swipes my damn phone out of my hand, breaks my phone. He breaks my phone. It's all on camera. Get somebody else out here right now, please. ASAP. There's a sheriff on the corner telling us stop. Yes. No. Get somebody out here now. Isaiah James. 561-578-1848. 561-578-1848. Listen, I'm in a Dodge Magnum. You asking too many questions. Get somebody out here. Oh yeah, get your supervisor, your captain out here right now.
2501 Broadway, 2501 Broadway.
All my stuff's clear, isn't it?
They haven't came back yet.
All my stuff's clear.
They haven't came
I don't have any warrants. And I'm handicapped. So why did you knock my phone out of my hand?
Is that you got out the car?
It does not matter how it looks,
people that
officer.
is handicapped, man.
Officer, I'm a damn disabled veteran.
But do that make you any better than a citizen?
I went through the process to get the damn.
Does that make you any better than a citizen or old lady in the wheelchair that really need that place?
So I don't really need it.
I'm just saying, you walk.
There's 1, 2, 3.
You walking.
I walk with a limp. There's screws in my leg.
I didn't see a limp.
You saw me walk a short distance. That's the whole purpose. That's the whole purpose, officer.
It's screws in my leg.
It's the short distance right there.
I have screws and pins in my leg.
Can I put my can I put my identification
you
up?
can do whatever you want to, but you're still in the wrong.
How am I in the wrong? I have a.
You can walk. It's people out there that can't walk.
I have a handicap placard issued by the state of Florida.
There's people out there that can't walk.
I am a disabled veteran.
Okay, but a U.S. citizen is a U.S. citizen.
I'm a U.S. citizen.
Okay, so what makes you better than an old lady that can't
walk? I'm not saying
walk?
there's anybody better than me, officer. I'm just saying that I walk with a limp. That's the whole purpose.
No, I'm just saying, what make you better? You
There's
come with
nothing.
this, oh, I'm a soldier, and I'm
am.
Okay, good. But what makes
Somebody
you
with
better?
common sense, please, use officer. Ask him why he stopped me. Because I got out of the handicap spot. I went inside with my dad to get some alcohol. He comes in there telling me I need to move because I'm not handicapped. I'm a goddamn disabled veteran. I walk in there, my handicap placard's good, my insurance is good, my license is good, my tag is good. He knocks my phone out of my hand when I start recording him. It's in the window right there.
It's there.
He just said because I don't look like I'm not disabled.
By law, you're supposed to be indigent to get a handicap sticker.
Issued to a person. Right?
It's issued to a person.
Injured.
I had to go through all the medical forms from the VA, see the doctor, everything.
He get out the car, he parks right next to me, get out, and just flow into the...
I walked short...
You were checking on it?
Yeah, so I was checking
No. It's the way he did it, and he knocked my phone out of my hand.
What I said is...
On the ground and broke my screen. It's right there.
I ain't break your screen.
Okay, too easy. Officer Wilson, Officer Laporta just showed up, so he doesn't really know. But it's too easy. It's too easy. Am I good to go, officer? You checked everything. You ran it. It's good.
No, it's coming back.
Okay.
It's coming back.
It's good. I don't have any warrants. He said I'm not disabled. I got 3 screws in my leg. I've been blown up fucking 8 times.
I got pins in my leg.
Times. I served fucking 2 tours in Iraq and 1 tour in Afghanistan as a fucking combat infantryman. He doesn't get to decide if I'm disabled. When I get fucking blown up...
Sir, what's your name?
Isaiah.
Isaiah, can I ask you to just bring it down a little
I will bring it down. I don't want to deal with him. He really knocked... Let me talk to you.
We got a big crowd, you know what I mean?
I want a big crowd because he knocked my phone out of my hand right there.
We don't need that.
So why... How,
video and everything, that's fine.
He's not the arbitrator of my...
Just bring it down.
He doesn't get to decide if I'm disabled. You know who does? Uncle Sam, who says, yes, you served your goddamn country. You did the right thing. You were fucked up for this. We're going to give you a handicap placard. I walk short distances. You want me to bring my medical records down there?
He does have the right to check on
He does have the right to check, but he doesn't have the right to fly off on me.
I didn't file for you.
Look at him now. See him now?
I did not file.
You see him now?
All I asked you
you see him now?
And you think that because you big, that somebody
You see his now?
That's what the problem is.
What is he doing? You talking to me like a man. You talking to me like a man.
But you're also talking to me up here too, though. So if we all bring it down, maybe.
But he needs to. You can't. You can't tell me, officer.
That I'm an American. I'm a soldier, and that.
No.
But I'm saying.
Right.
What
I
makes
told
you
him, run
so
it, run it,
special?
run it.
Because you
Just run
fought
it.
for the country, then an American citizen.
I am an American citizen. Last time I checked, I was born October 13, 1986 in St. Mary's Hospital. I'm an American citizen.
I'm an American
I raised my hand and enlisted in the United States Army
Like you
September
got
2nd,
pins in your leg, I
2005.
got pins in my leg.
Okay?
All right?
Officer, please. Yeah, I'm talking to you. Because he doesn't have the... What kind of fucking horse shit is that?
Look, I don't know what happened.
I do, and guess what? He knocked my phone out of my hand. It's on video.
I don't know what happened before I got here.
This shit is hard. This shit's bad for your department. He's harassing disabled veterans. When this video goes on fucking YouTube and Facebook, that's fucking horrible. It's horrible. You're not the arbitrator to decide if I'm fucking injured or not.
Right.
When I was in fucking the Army, in the fucking VA for all those years, getting treatment, I go see my fucking social worker every month. They decide if I'm disabled.
You're still cussing at me, though. Right?
Soldiers curse.
Are you mad at me?
No,
look, I'm a
I'm
soldier.
mad at him.
Isaiah, I was a soldier.
What was your MOS?
8791, 54 Bravo.
I was 11 Bravo,
Okay.
so you know.
So I know. Right.
So what?
So I
what
cuss
the fuck
too,
is his
but
deal?
but you gotta just
He's saying that I'm not
I don't
disabled.
need you all mad.
What you should do as a cop is like, can I see your license, registration, sir? Run your shit. Run my plate. It comes back clean. You're not a doctor. You don't get to decide if my injury is real or fake, which is fucking real. I'm disabled for the rest of my life. I gave him my damn retired ID. I gave him my VA ID. I gave him my fucking all my IDs to show him. I'm not making this up.
All right.
He doesn't get that's fucked up.
You're right. I mean, I don't know how he did it, but maybe he came across you wrong.
What? For what? The number's on the thing, officer. You can run it from there. Do I have to give it to him? Because it's on the front of the thing. He can check it.
Right. I mean, if you want, so maybe you can see it.
You can see it. Yes, it's registered, my license plate and everything. I'm a fucking disabled soldier, man. You're hassling me for no reason at all. You hassle disabled soldiers in Riviera Beach. Is that what happens? I think it is. I've been here for 20 fucking minutes for no reason. I hadn't done anything wrong because I'm disabled. I'm getting hassled. That's horse shit and a half, officer. That's horse shit and a half, and you know it. Look, my license number is right there on the plate. Run it.
I see it.
What the hell is going on around here?
I'm just running the handicap placard.
Here's what your recourse is.
No, my recourse is to take this video, put it on there, go talk to your supervisor, and file a lawsuit for being fucking... That's what's gonna happen.
Yes, you're right.
Because he slapped my phone out of my hand. It's
That's
on
your right to do
camera.
that.
There's cameras everywhere, man.
So here's what I'm saying, Isaiah.
You can't lie about that.
Look at me. I'm trying to help you out.
I'm trying to help. What's up? Run it.
Look, listen. Bring it down here.
We constructed fake resumes over 6,000, and 1/3 indicated that the applicant had a spinal cord injury, 1/3 indicated they had Asperger's syndrome, and 1/3 did not disclose a disability. And this was in the cover letters, not in the resumes. All the resumes were identical. And do you want to take it?
Yeah, so we just wanted to explore whether job applicants with disabilities received fewer expressions of employer interest than those without disabilities.
And
what we found was fairly interesting. 26% of people with disabilities, or applicants, received fewer expressions of employer interest than those without disabilities. And our applicants who had high experience were the ones that didn't get a call back. And this was mostly centralized around small-sized firms.
Right.
How does this research differ from previous research on disability employment?
Well, there have been surveys asking employers about their attitudes and behavior towards job applicants and employees with disabilities. But you always have to worry there that something called social desirability bias, where they're telling you what they think you want to hear. And this way, by actually sending out resumes, you eliminate that problem.
It's reminiscent of a famous research study done years ago now that with the identical resumes, but one had a black-sounding name, whatever that means, and the result was that those people got fewer callbacks.
Exactly, and we used that study as kind of a jumping-off place for our study.
How does this type of research into discrimination get at discrimination in a way that other studies couldn't?
Well, in terms of implications, when you look at field experimentation, what we're doing is we're sending out mock applicants into the field, but employers don't know that. So as they're screening through these profiles, they're assuming that these are tried and true applicants.
Can you extract from this information why?
Well, that's really interesting. We could not interview any of the employers, but we believe that there is still a lot of stigma attached to disability. And what really surprised us, as Mason mentioned, was that the experienced applicants had fewer callbacks than the novice applicants. Now that goes against what we expected, because we thought, listen, if you have a CPA, this was for accountant positions, if you have a CPA, you have a stellar record, you have 6 years of experience, we thought they'd do better. But we think that employers see these candidates as riskier, they'd have to pay them more, and they don't want to take that risk on. They see disability and they think, oh my goodness, they're going to demand an accommodation, there's going to be liability, we're not going to be able to predict how they're going to work.
And that's how you think it relates to the whole employment picture for people with disabilities?
We think it's a big piece of it.
Certainly.
Yes.
Of course, when we identified that small-sized firms amongst our sample size of 6,016 were more likely to not give us a callback, in terms of implications, it may just be that these small-sized firms don't have a robust HR infrastructure or aren't even familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act, although they're not necessarily mandated by the Act.
What surprised you the most about this?
Well, as far as the story itself and really the narration of the data is, it's two-pronged. On one side, you see that medium and large-sized firms are, for what it's worth, abiding by the mandate, the ADA. On the flip side, it seems as though that small-sized firms are more likely to commit to legal discrimination. At least that's one implication, right, that we can assume. And as far as implications for the Act, well, the Act is working, but perhaps we should lower the threshold and include some of those small-sized firms.
Can I just jump in here for a second? So we found there was a big difference between companies with less than 15 employees who are not covered by the ADA and those that were bigger than, had more than 15 employees. Right. And that's where we really saw a large difference.
What are the long-term implications of this? How do you make this work the world, if you will?
Well, there's several things. As Mason said, one thing would be to expand coverage of the ADA so that you don't have to have that 15 employee threshold in order to be covered by the law. It seems as if perhaps the smaller companies aren't even aware of what they should be doing. They might not know that maybe they have a state law that covers them. We don't know. But expanding coverage of the ADA would definitely be a first step. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's also a conversation of diversity, right, and how diversity matters. And given the climate in terms of just the presidential election coming up and whatnot, ultimately, we need to bring diversity, as far as disability diversity, to the forefront. And studies of this nature are really going to address something that we have known in the body of literature that is the disability movement.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.